We promised you ideas. We are bringing you ideas. Consider that a challenge to every other company in California, right? Very happy to introduce our next speaker. Talking about the workforce, we are on theme here, especially women in the workforce. I'm going to bring up Sameea Kamal, the Capitol reporter for CalMatters, one of our rock star journalists who's working every day to help explain what's going on in this state that we are in, and she's going to introduce our very special guest.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I will get right into it. We're honored to have with us former state controller and now a candidate for governor, Betty Yee. Born and raised in San Francisco, Betty got an early start managing finances for her family's dry cleaning business, where at the age of 8, she started doing the bookkeeping for the business in the city. She has spent 4 decades in public service, working for the legislature as the budget director for former Governor Gray Davis. She was elected to the State Board of Equalization in 2004 before being elected as state controller, where she served 2 terms through 2022. Aside from her background in finance, another area that has been key for Betty is healthcare, some of which has been shaped by her own experiences, helping her father navigate the healthcare system through an illness, and also sharing caregiving responsibilities with her sisters for her 101-year-old mother, some of which is the basis for a book that she's writing about women in the workforce. So thank you for joining us, and if you could tell us a little bit about that work.
Thank you, Sameea, and really a pleasure to be part of the inaugural CalMatters Idea Fest. You know, it's interesting as I just think about my career and certainly my life now, all of the intersections, right? And I think about how, as I'm experiencing that as a Californian, as a native Californian, are we really thinking about this with respect to other people's lives? And, you know, when I am in the public policy sphere, so much of the time, I just loathe that whole myth, actually it's not a myth, but long-lived kind of reputation that government has, and that is we're very good at creating silos. And so as I think about just the work that I'm doing now, certainly in preparing for my run for governor, but certainly my personal life, people don't live in silos. They live whole lives that really are affected by so much that's around them, by their environment, by relationships in their communities. And so I'm just hopeful that as we particularly are in kind of this budget situation now, that it's a time for a reset about how we look at deploying our resources, that really recognize that, you know, people's lives aren't segmented, people's lives aren't about, you know, reacting to, you know, what's available in a budget, but that people's lives are really about just bringing all the resources to bear that are in front of them to uplift those around them. So it's a philosophy that I've developed over the years, but it's become much truer in terms of my life now.
Yeah, thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about, you know, your experience with caregiving and how that has influenced your life and your work?
It has been probably, I see my good friend Carl Guardino here. I remember being on a panel at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and he had asked me, what is the toughest decision that you've ever had to make? And I would say becoming a caregiver for my mother. I knew nothing about, you know, how to run a nutritional pump. I knew nothing about, you know, how to administer medications. I knew nothing about any of that. And yet, when I think about the people who do this work, how little they're valued, and now having experienced this now going on 7 years with my siblings, this is a part of the economy that California, I hope, can provide some leadership in. It is an economic crisis in the making. If we're not looking at the care needs for older adults, those within our communities who have special needs, and certainly for our young people as well with respect to childcare. It is what makes all other work possible, really, when you think about being able to have reliable and consistent caregiving for your loved ones. So it's informed my work a lot. And I also think that for me, it's instilled certainly the value of care just back in everything that I do. And I hope that as a state that it's just not about going through the motions of what we have to do, but that there is this element of care, that we are thinking long-term about how we're going to provide for our loved ones' needs, and that we're thinking about, certainly for our young people, how they're going to be supported in their development as well.
Yeah, you talked about resources, and I think, as we're talking about investments in the workforce and in different policy areas that we'll talk about today, homelessness and equity,
Yeah.
a lot of that ties back to what the state is able to do through its budget. And, given your wealth of experience both as budget director for Governor Gray Davis, as state controller,
Sure.
you've had a very in-depth look at the state's finances. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the situation we're in right now, which is California faces a budget shortfall of somewhere between $27 billion
Yes.
and maybe $50 billion, depending on who you ask. So could you talk a little bit about, how bad, in the long view that you have, how bad is it, and what should the state do about it?
Sure. I think, Sameea, as I think about the budget challenges the legislature is dealing with now, a bit different from what I encountered in my past years as a budget leader. And that is, we're being compelled now and being forced to look at making decisions for the short term and the long term at the same time, with finite resources. And the challenge with that is that, how do you begin to prioritize? And for me, I hope that this deficit situation is the beginning of a reset about how California can be much more intentional about inviting strict accountability over how we spend our money. I know that for me, as I travel the state, there are many communities that remain untouched. And I do believe that investments in those communities actually can yield some tremendous benefits. And then also just really thinking long term. The housing crisis that we're in was not unanticipated. And I remember almost 15 years ago, one of our rating agencies, S&P, had really made the statement, which was really unique for bond rating agencies. And they essentially said, if California doesn't get a handle on the affordability of housing, it will continue to be an economic drag. 15 years ago. And we were seeing that really happen. And for women especially, the burden of housing and the cost of housing is quite severe. Spending much more, many women spending much more than 50% of their income on just rental housing now. So the dynamics are there, but we also know that if we think about it for the long term, that we can look at how we retool existing programs to meet these needs, current and long term. It's not necessarily about standing up a new program. I think we know what some of the solutions are when we go into communities and what the needs are, but really looking at having that discipline to respond to these needs, both short term and long term, and involving the communities that are most affected.
Yeah, while you were state controller back in 2016, you had a study done, evaluating tax reform in California,
Yeah.
which is one of the mechanisms that we can, one of the tools in the toolbox to address the deficit. That could include, increasing taxes on the wealthy or increasing the corporate tax rate. So I'm curious if any of the lessons learned from then, carry over today. Do you see, an appetite for tax reform?
Oh, gosh. No, I don't see an appetite, to be frank. I would say that the commission that I established looking at how we could approach tax reform was a very good look into just the current system, how we got here. But we're also living in a world that is changing rapidly. And so I think some of us subscribe to the fact that our tax system really should reflect the economy of today. But when the economy is moving so quickly, what does that look like? What does the tax burden look like for any Californian? And when I talk about the tax burden, it's really getting granular about not just looking at what the tax revenue is that's collected by the state as the ratio to statewide income, but it's really being very granular about how are our lower quintiles doing? How are the upper income earners doing? And you're going to see just such variation to where tax reform is going to have different impacts across the board. And then, of course, you want to just understand why is it that we want to undergo tax reform? For most of the people that I speak to, it's about generating additional revenue. I don't think that's sufficient enough. It should be always about how we tie it back to how it can really be a catalyst for the economy that we want to have developed here in California, and to be sure that everyone is a part of it.
Yeah, so these are not easy conversations to have, but some, difficult decisions that you might have to make if you are elected governor in 2026. Could you talk a little bit about what motivated you to run for the state's highest office?
Sure. In some ways, it really was a reminder, as I'm with my mother especially, that my parents are immigrants from China, and I remember for both of them, my mother's by far the risk taker among my parents, between my parents. And I remember when they were embarking on buying their first home, and the home where my mother still lives now, where we all grew up. And my father was always worried about money. What if I don't have enough money to pay the mortgage? What if we don't earn enough, during the week to be able to do that? And she just said to him, I'll just go out and get a job. And she tells me today, she doesn't believe it, my father, and she would be able to make a go of a small business today because of high costs. She tells me today that she's not sure that she could have supported 6 children and really have us all be able to attend college with the supports that they gave us. And so I think about a time where California actually had supports for Californians who are vulnerable or feeling vulnerability. So when my mother made that statement, yes, there were definitely government programs that could be helpful, and she would go out and get a job, and she really believed that that was a way that she could continue to support the family. Today, we have Californians working 2 or 3 jobs already. So that's not even an option, right? And so when I think about what needs to be retooled, it is that we have had all of these programs that have been successful at providing supports to Californians over the past. It is time to really revisit them, to understand that we're in an economy now where workers are probably going to have dozens of jobs over their lifetime rather than a handful. That when we talk about worker resilience, before the UI fund actually got into this big mess that we're in today, perhaps that could have been a partnership with our employers about how we look at building worker resilience. To look at some of these other supports that are there where we just anticipate where Californians will be possibly experiencing vulnerability, and what can government do to really be sure that they don't have to bear that burden or be set back in terms of the gains that they've made.
Yeah. So the field for the gubernatorial race, despite it being 2 years away, is getting a little crowded out there. Some who have declared and some who we're still waiting on to see where they go.
Yes.
But can you tell us a little bit about what differentiates you from the other candidates in the
Sure.
race?
First of all, let me just say right out, running for office and serving in office was not a teenage dream of mine. Didn't have any thoughts about doing this at all. But it is one that I have found to be very rewarding. One, I enjoy campaigning. We live in a great state. Great state. It is worth fighting for. It is worth, really doing this hard work to be sure that everyone sees themselves in this vision about, whether it's a California for all or a California where they feel like they can be successful, safe, thriving, where they have opportunities for their children, their grandchildren. So that is, I think, a value and a vision that is worth definitely working hard for. But I actually wanted to put my hat in the ring because I do feel that one of the aspects of governing in California that's been missing is how we engage our communities much more robustly. There are answers out there. In fact, I believe there are answers to every problem that we're trying to solve in California. If we open our eyes and involve the communities that have to live with the consequences of not having been invested in, of not having just the basics of what they need to be able to support their families. And so, and part of why I love campaigning is because but for running a statewide election campaign, how else would I intersect and have these opportunities to have these conversations with Californians? So I do think that part of what will separate my candidacy from the others is that I will be all over the state. I'm learning all of what is the experience of Californians, and it will inform the work that I do as governor.
Thank you. You had also done some work with an organization called California Women Lead,
Yes.
A nonprofit that helps propel women into office. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that work with the backdrop that, California has never had a woman governor and what that means.
So California Women Lead, still very strong organization, and had the privilege of serving on its board in my early years as an elected official, is a wonderful organization that is about uplifting women in leadership from all sectors of our society. Private sector women, certainly elected women, and then those in the policy space, and in the nonprofit space as well. The whole idea here is that when women come together in a nonpartisan fashion, there is just a makings of just, I think, frankly, the biggest think tank that is possible in terms of how we look at just addressing a number of these issues that are going to be certainly topical for this Ideas Fest, but and moving forward. And why I say that is because I think women, for sure, have a different orientation about how we come to issues. We have so many informal ways of how we look at addressing problems. We network with the networks that we're used to, which are all about getting things done, frankly, whether you've been a mom, whether you've been a caregiver, whether you've been just a civic leader. We tend to always go to our networks to look at where we have expertise to get things done. So you can imagine what that means when you expand that network to women from all different sectors. And so I'm just really pleased that it's still going strong, and I know I'll continue to be involved with it as much as I can.
Yeah, you mentioned, women might approach positions of power differently, and, I think that's something that we have covered at CalMatters. We've kept an eye on representation in state government, and I think a question I get a lot in response to those stories is does it matter? What difference does it make? So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, it definitely matters. You look at, there's this really popular saying, I use it a lot because I actually believe in it, and that is, when we can bring our lived experiences to the work that we do, we are so much the better for it. And particularly if we're creating forums where we actually have those experiences be given voice and inform the work that we do. And so I think representation from the perspective of not just gender, but also the experiences that entails in terms of maybe being the first in so many situations in your community, or looking at how you solve a problem where local government may not have been responsive, but it really is at that community level where we make change. And so all of those things just speak to the resourcefulness of women, and also just whatever we have to do to roll up our sleeves to get the job done, we will do. But I also think that so much of what is happening in our economy today can be improved if we really value women and are intentional about how we address gender equity and certainly a lot of the inequality that continues to exist with respect to women's potential.
Yeah, I believe you were the second woman to serve as controller and the first woman of color, and I'm wondering if that shaped your experience in that role.
It did. I think one of the wonderful things about serving as the controller is that you really have a unique view to look out over the state to see what is working well in our economy and what isn't. And of course, what tends to get my attention is where things are not necessarily working well. And then translating that into how well California is responding to where things aren't working well. And I think it is uniquely a unique perspective when I do come into this work as a woman, certainly as a woman of color, because I gravitate towards those communities. I gravitate towards the underserved communities. I gravitate towards the frontline communities that bear the burdens of so many of the policies that we've enacted, and yet we've not really stepped back to just look at how we address them, much more effectively. And so it has certainly, I think, in some ways affected where I put my attention, but I also believe that that is where we need to place our attention to look at how we begin to have a California where everyone has a sense of agency. Everyone has a sense that they are a part of the future we're trying to build together. And look, I'm a numbers person and a finance person, so I also like to think about the fact that we are working in an era of finite resources, so we have to be smarter about the resources we have. And I will tell you that in communities that have been under-resourced and underserved, a lot of courage there, because I don't frankly know how they wake up every day, some of these communities, and even have an ounce of hope. When they're turning on their faucet and no water comes through, in terms of potable water. When they look at schools that are really substandard in terms of facilities not being upgraded. Those kinds of things you think, this can't be in California. It is right here in California. But I also know that if we pay attention to those communities with even the most modest of investments, we will see results.
Thank you. I think we are coming up on time, but what would you like audiences to take away from, just your work, your experience, and the work that you hope to do in the future?
Yeah, thank you. Sameea, I think for me, I love the state. I think we all love the state, or we wouldn't be doing the work that we do and committing our time to just making it better. And we can make it better. I would say that it is something that I feel very seriously about, and that is my boss, when I was in elected office, were the 8 million Californians who elected me. And frankly, the 39 million Californians who live here. And so I always say, it's not my money that I'm overseeing, but I hope that we can get into a framework of where we're not afraid of just inviting strict accountability over what we do. And this sounds, really bureaucratic, but I'm going to say it's not. It really, I think, is demanded of us in the public sector that we have to be accountable for our actions, but more importantly, accountable for the resources that we are tasked to really be good stewards of. And when I mean strict accountability, it is about, are we delivering results? I did 200 meetings since the year that I left office around the state to a person. Several issues arose as consensus issues. One, people want to really rely on services and know that they're going to be delivered as contemplated. Secondly, they want the schools to be in good shape for their kids. People want to feel safe when they leave their homes. And they want to know that they are going to be able to survive in California and see a future here because of the affordability crisis. To a person, those were the 4 top things. And when I hear that, it says to me, okay, we can conquer this agenda. And it just means that we have to do it together and really be our eyes open, that let's invite strict accountability over how we're using our resources. Are we making progress? Are we not making progress? If not, what do we need to do to really address the situation much more effectively so that we can see many more Californians' lives improve? So it's what motivates me to serve in the first place, but more importantly now, as I see that California is in a tremendous crossroads with our affordability crisis especially, it is really demanded of us.
All right, thank you so much. I know these are kind of very wonky conversations to have at 9 a.m, but I appreciate you, sharing your experience and all of you for tuning in. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sameea. Thank you.